The rain came down in sheets, a merciless silver curtain that turned the world outside the car into a wash of blurred lights and deep, impenetrable shadow. Inside the silent cabin of the Mercedes S-Class, Naomi felt a coldness that had nothing to do with the autumn chill. Her car, a machine of perfect German engineering, was utterly and completely dead. She had tried everything: the ignition, the hazard lights, the call to her roadside assistance, which went straight to an automated message about unprecedented call volumes. Of course. She sat in a tailored Armani suit that now felt like a cage, her natural hair pulled back in an elegant updo that had been perfect for the boardroom she'd just left, but was absurd on the shoulder of this deserted back road. She was a powerhouse, a titan of industry, a black woman who had shattered so many glass ceilings they'd stopped counting. And here she was, stranded, powerless, and utterly alone. Her phone had one bar of service, flickering like a dying candle. She could call her parents, but the thought of their disappointed sighs and "we told you not to work so late" lectures was more exhausting than the idea of sleeping in the car. She could call her assistant, but the young woman had a family, a life. Naomi commanded armies of people during the day, but at night, in a crisis, there was no one. The thought landed with a dull, familiar ache. It was the price of the life she had built, a life of pristine surfaces and cavernous, echoing loneliness. The flashing red of a tow truck's lights appeared in her rearview mirror, a sudden, miraculous beacon in the oppressive dark. She didn't know it then, sitting in her cold leather seat, a tremor of relief running through her. She didn't know that help was on its way, and her life, the one she had so carefully constructed, was about to be turned upside down. The call had come in at 9:47 p.m., just as Kieran was easing into the worn armchair that had been his wife's favorite. The dispatcher's voice was tinny, impersonal. "Stranded vehicle, high-end sedan, Route 7. He sighed, running a hand over his short, trimmed natural hair. It was late, and Amara was already asleep. But a call was a call, and the Bills didn't care about bedtime. He pushed himself up, his tall frame moving with a quiet weariness that seemed to settle in his bones at the end of each day. His apartment was small, but it was a sanctuary of warmth and color. The walls were a soft yellow, the air smelled faintly of the cinnamon tea he'd brewed earlier, and the refrigerator was a chaotic gallery of Amara's artwork. Crayon suns with wavy arms, lopsided houses, and a recurring motif of a butterfly with mismatched wings. He paused in the doorway of his daughter's room. Amara was a small bundle under a bright pink comforter, her chest rising and falling in the steady rhythm of sleep. Her hair, which he had painstakingly twisted that morning, fanned out on the pillow, the colorful beads at the ends catching the soft glow from the hallway light. She was 6 years old, and she was the sun his entire world orbited. He knelt by her bed, his large, calloused hand gently stroking her cheek. Her brown skin was so soft, so perfect. He hated waking her. "Amara, sweet girl," he whispered. "Daddy's got a late call. We have to go for a little ride." Her eyes fluttered open, dark and luminous. She wasn't fussy. She never was. She just blinked the sleep away and sat up. "Is it an adventure?" she asked, her voice thick with dreams. He smiled, a genuine expression that eased the tired lines around his eyes. "Always." He helped her into her yellow rain boots and a warm jacket, her beaded braids clicking softly as she moved. While she sat at the small kitchen table nibbling on the apple slices he cut for her, he prepared. He filled a small thermos with warm milk and honey for her, and grabbed her favorite book about a girl who could talk to stars. He checked the simple gold band on his own finger. A habit, a memory. On the nightstand by his bed, A silver frame held a picture of a woman with Amara's eyes and a smile that could have lit up the whole city. Maya. The grief was no longer a tidal wave that threatened to drown him. It was a quiet current, always there, a part of the water he swam in every day. He took a deep breath, tucked the pain back into its designated place in his heart, and focused on the task at hand: being a father. The drive was quiet except for the rhythmic thump of the windshield wipers and Amara's soft chatter from her car seat. She wasn't asking questions, just narrating the world as she saw it. "The rain is making the streetlights cry, Daddy. Look, crying diamonds." Kieran glanced at her in the rearview mirror, his heart swelling with a fierce, protective love. She saw the world with a poet's eyes, finding beauty in a storm. He was just a man who fixed broken things. A black man in his early 30s trying to build a life for his daughter from the pieces of the one that had shattered. He was reliable, he was patient, he was strong, but she was magic. He turned onto Route 7, his headlights cutting through the downpour, and saw it. A sleek black sedan, looking like a panther resting wounded on the asphalt, and beside it, a woman. Naomi waited, her arms crossed against the cold. The tow truck that pulled up was old, weathered, but clean. A man emerged, and he was not what she expected. He was tall, with broad shoulders, outlined by a heavy-duty work jacket. His dark brown skin seemed to absorb the minimal light, and he moved with a calm, unhurried grace. He wasn't deferential, but he wasn't aggressive. He was just present. "Ma'am," he said, his voice a low, steady baritone that cut through the sound of the rain. "Having some trouble?" "It won't start," she said, her own voice clipped, professional. It was her default setting. "The electronics are completely dead," he nodded, his eyes scanning the vehicle with an expert's efficiency. "Pop the hood for me." As he worked, a small face appeared in the passenger window of the truck. A little black girl with bright, curious eyes and braids with yellow and pink beads. The girl gave a tiny, shy wave. Against all her instincts, Naomi found herself waving back. The man, Kieran, his name was stitched on his jacket, spent 10 minutes under the hood, the rain plastering his jacket to his back. Finally, he straightened up, wiping his dark hands on a rag. "It's the alternator. It's completely fried. I can't fix it out here. I'll have to tow it to the shop." Naomi's shoulders slumped. "Fine. Just call me a car service, please." He looked at her. Really looked at her. For the first time. He saw the expensive suit, the exhaustion in her eyes, the slight tremor in her hands. He didn't see a CEO. He saw a woman who was cold and stranded. "It'll take them an hour to get out here in this weather," he said. "My daughter and I can give you a ride into town. It's no trouble." Her every instinct screamed no. Getting into a stranger's truck was not something a woman in her position did. It was a risk. But then she looked at the little girl's face, still pressed against the window, and at this man's quiet, steady gaze. There was no angle, no calculation in his eyes. Just a simple offer of help. "Okay," she heard herself say, the word feeling foreign in her own mouth. "Thank you." The inside of the truck was another world. It was warm, the heater blasting a gentle wave of comfort. It smelled of coffee and something sweet. Maybe cinnamon. The dashboard was clean, but a small, hand-drawn picture of a butterfly was taped above the radio. Naomi slid into the passenger seat, her silk blouse and wool suit feeling ridiculously out of place. "I'm Kieran," he said, pulling back onto the road. "And this is my co-pilot, Amara." "Hi," the little girl chirped from the back. "My name is Amara, and I'm 6, and my favorite color is yellow like my boots, and Daddy says you have a sad face. Why is your face so sad?" Naomi was stunned into silence. The unfiltered honesty of the question was like a tiny, sharp key turning a lock deep inside her she didn't even know was there. Kieran's voice was gentle but firm. "Amara, that's not a polite question to ask someone we just met." "But she does," Amara insisted. "It looks like my face when I miss Mommy." The cab of the truck filled with a silence so profound it felt louder than the rain. Kieran's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. Naomi felt a strange, unwelcome prickle behind her eyes. Before she could formulate a response, Kieran reached beside him and picked up a small silver thermos. "Here," he said, not looking at her. His voice was a little rough. "It's ginger tea with honey. It's warm. Drink this." It wasn't a question. It was a gentle command, an act of service. He handed it to her, his fingers brushing hers for a fraction of a second. His hand was rough, calloused, but warm. She took the thermos, its heat seeping into her frozen fingers. No one had told her to drink this since she was a child. No one had offered her simple, uncomplicated comfort without an invoice or an agenda attached. She unscrewed the cap, the fragrant steam rising to meet her, and for the first time in over a decade, Naomi, the untouchable CEO, felt the stinging, terrifying, and overwhelming urge to cry. She took a sip of the sweet, warm tea and stared out at the crying diamonds on the window, forcing the tears back down. He dropped her at the entrance to her high-rise apartment building, the uniformed doorman rushing out with an umbrella, his eyes wide with surprise at the sight of the old tow truck. As Naomi stepped out, she realized with a jolt of panic that her briefcase, containing her laptop and the entire next quarter's strategy proposal, was still on the floor of the truck. "Wait," she called out, but he was already pulling away, a friendly wave visible through the rain-streaked window. She stood there, under the doorman's umbrella, feeling a strange mix of annoyance and something else she couldn't name. It meant she would have to see him again. The next day he called her assistant. Her number had been on the towing receipt, and arranged to drop the briefcase off at her office. Naomi found herself feeling an absurd flutter of anticipation. When he walked into the marble and glass lobby of her corporate headquarters, he looked just as out of place as she had felt in his truck, yet he carried himself with an unshakable dignity. He wore clean work pants and a pressed but worn button-down shirt. He didn't gawk at the soaring ceilings or the expensive modern art. His focus was singular. He handed the briefcase to her assistant with a polite nod. Naomi intercepted him before he could leave. "Thank you, Kieran. I'd like to compensate you for your time." He shook his head. "Wasn't any trouble. Just returning what was yours." "Please," she insisted, feeling the need to re-establish the familiar transactional nature of her world. "Let me buy you a coffee at least, as a proper thank you." He hesitated for a moment, then a small smile touched his lips. "Okay, a coffee would be nice." They sat in a sterile cafe across the street, the air buzzing with the low hum of business deals and stock market chatter. He looked at ease, sipping his black coffee, while she felt strangely like she was on an interview. "So, you fix things?" she said, stating the obvious. "I do," he said. "Cars, plumbing, broken cabinets. People's bad days sometimes." He said it without a hint of irony. He talked about his work with a quiet pride she rarely saw in the executives she managed, who spoke of their jobs in terms of conquests and market share. He spoke about Amara, his whole face softening. He described her latest artistic masterpiece, a portrait of their downstairs neighbor's cat, which he said looked more like a potato with whiskers. A genuine laugh escaped Naomi's lips, a sound so unexpected it startled them both. She, in turn, found herself talking, not about mergers or profit margins, but about the suffocating pressure, the endless meetings. She didn't reveal anything truly personal, but the armor was a little lighter than it had been before. A week later, her phone buzzed with a text from a number she didn't recognize. "This is Kieran. Amara has declared it National Spaghetti Night and insists you are the guest of honor. No pressure, but she is a very demanding head chef. Naomi stared at the message, a war raging inside her. It was unprofessional. It crossed a boundary. It was also the most genuine invitation she had received in years. She typed back a single word. When? His apartment was exactly as she had imagined. Small, warm, and filled with love. The spaghetti was simple, the salad came from a bag, and the garlic bread was slightly burnt on one side. It was the best meal she'd had all year. After dinner, she found herself sitting on the living room floor, a box of crayons between her and Amara, trying to draw a butterfly that didn't look like a potato with wings. She had traded her designer heels for a pair of his thick wool socks. The CEO of a multi-billion-dollar corporation was sitting on a worn rug, coloring. The absurdity of it was liberating. Amara, with the serious focus of a true artist, was working on a new piece. When she was finished, she held it up for inspection. It was a drawing of 3 stick figures against a bright blue sky. They were all holding hands. "This is my masterpiece," she announced. "It's beautiful, sweet girl," Kieran said, smiling from his armchair. "Tell me about it," Naomi said, leaning in. Amara pointed a small finger at the tallest figure. "That's Daddy. He's a tall black man with strong arms for lifting things." Then she moved to the smallest figure. "And that's me, a little black girl with beads in my hair that make music when I run." Her finger landed on the last figure, the one in the middle, wearing a scribbled blue dress. "And that's you." Naomi's breath caught in her throat. "You're a beautiful black woman," Amara said, her voice full of simple, irrefutable truth. "And you're holding our hands." Naomi looked at the drawing, at the brown crayon skin, the carefully rendered natural hair on the woman's head. The 3 of them connected. Amara wasn't just drawing a picture, she was drawing a possibility. She was drawing a family. Naomi couldn't speak. She could only stare at the piece of paper, a gift more precious than any stock option or bonus she had ever received. Later that evening, after Amara was tucked into bed, a comfortable quiet settled between them. They sat in the small living room, the only light coming from a single lamp that cast a warm, golden glow. "She's an amazing kid," Naomi said softly, breaking the silence. "She's her mother's daughter," Kieran replied, his gaze distant. It was the first time he'd mentioned her directly. "Maya." She saw the world like that, full of color and possibility, even when things were hard. He spoke about his late wife, not with overwhelming sadness, but with a gentle, loving reverence. He told her how they met in college, how she'd been studying to be a teacher, how cancer had taken her quickly, too quickly, leaving him with a 6-month-old baby and a hole in the universe. He didn't perform his grief. He simply allowed Naomi to witness the space it occupied in his life. His vulnerability was an invitation. Naomi found herself speaking words she hadn't planned to say. "My parents, they love me, I think, but they love the idea of me more, the success, the name. When my engagement ended, the first thing my mother asked was how it would look to the board." She traced the rim of her water glass. "I've never had someone look at me and not see a balance sheet or a stepping stone." He didn't offer platitudes or solutions. He just listened. He held the space for her quiet confession. In that small, warm apartment surrounded by the evidence of a life built on love and not ambition, Naomi felt something shift inside her. A wall she had spent decades building had just developed a crack, not from a powerful force, but from a gentle, persistent kindness. He was seeing her, not the CEO, not the powerhouse, just Naomi. And for the first time, she felt what it might be like to not be alone. The weeks that followed were a gentle unfolding. They fell into a rhythm of shared meals, weekend trips to the park with Amara, and quiet evenings of conversation. Naomi found herself leaving the office at 5, an act that would have been unthinkable 2 months prior. She learned the names of the characters in Amara's favorite books. She learned that Kieran had a dry, surprising wit, and that his hands, though calloused from work, could be incredibly gentle when fixing Amara's barrettes. As the leaves turned from gold to brown and a chill entered the air, the specter of the holidays loomed. For Naomi, it had always been a time of performative family gatherings and strained, polite conversation. This year, the thought was unbearable. "Come with me," she said one evening, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. They were sitting on his small balcony, wrapped in blankets, watching the city lights flicker to life. "For Thanksgiving, my family has a gathering at my parents' estate upstate." Kieran was quiet for a long moment. He looked at her, his dark eyes searching hers. He saw the hope there, but also the fear. She was asking him to step into her world, a world she herself had described as cold and transactional. "Are you sure?" he asked softly. "We don't exactly fit the mold." "I want you there," she said, her voice firm with a conviction that surprised her. "I want them to meet you and Amara. I want to show them what real warmth looks like," she thought. "I want to bring your light into my darkness." He finally nodded. "Okay, for you." The estate was even more intimidating than she remembered. A sprawling stone mansion set on acres of manicured, lifeless lawn. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of wax and old money. Naomi's mother, Eleanor, greeted them at the door. She was a tall, impeccably dressed black woman in her 60s, her smile perfectly polite and utterly devoid of warmth. Her eyes swept over Kieran's simple but neat blazer and slacks, and Amara's bright red dress, with a flicker of something Naomi recognized instantly: assessment. "Naomi, darling," she said, air-kissing her daughter's cheek. "And this must be your friend, Kieran." She said his name as if it were a foreign word she was trying to pronounce. "And the little one. How sweet." The afternoon was a gauntlet of thinly veiled interrogations from aunts and uncles. "And what is it you do, Kieran?" one uncle asked, his tone dripping with condescension. "I fix things," Kieran answered simply, his voice steady. He held Amara's hand, a small, warm anchor in a sea of chilly judgment. He didn't elaborate. He didn't try to impress them. He just was. His quiet dignity was a shield they couldn't seem to penetrate. Naomi felt a knot of dread tightening in her stomach. She had been a fool to bring them here. This place was a mausoleum of emotion, and they were a vibrant, living flame. She saw the way her family looked at him, their polite smiles failing to mask their dismissive appraisal. They saw his worn shoes, his lack of a prestigious title. They saw a project for their successful daughter. They did not see the man who had rescued her in a storm, the father who braided his daughter's hair, the quiet soul who had shown her more kindness in 2 months than she had known in a lifetime. When the time for dinner was announced, a formally dressed staff member approached their small group. "Dinner is served in the main hall," he announced, then turned to Kieran. "Sir, if you and the young lady would follow me." Naomi frowned. "We're all going to the dining room." "Of course, ma'am," the staffer said, avoiding her eyes. Mrs. Vance thought the little one would be more comfortable elsewhere. He led them not to the grand dining room, where a long, glittering table was set for 30, but to a small, sunless alcove off the kitchen. There, a small, round card table had been set up, covered with a paper cloth and surrounded by a few mismatched chairs. The kids' table. 2 of her cousin's young children were already there, scribbling on coloring placemats. The humiliation was a physical blow. It was so petty, so deliberately cruel. Amara, oblivious, was delighted. "Look, Daddy, coloring. Can I sit with them?" But Kieran's face was a mask of granite. He looked at Naomi, and in his eyes she saw not anger, but a deep, quiet disappointment. Not in her, but in the world she had brought him into. He knelt down, fixed Amara's dress, and gave her a kiss on the forehead. "Of course, sweet girl. You go have fun." He stood up, his posture straight, his dignity a fortress. He was doing this for his daughter. He was absorbing the insult so she could have a happy moment. Naomi felt sick. She turned to find her mother watching from the doorway, a look of serene satisfaction on her face. "He'll be more comfortable there, dear," Eleanor said, her voice a placid whisper. "It's for the best." In that moment, Naomi saw her entire life with a horrifying clarity. The conditional love, the constant judgment, the crushing weight of expectations. This table wasn't just for Kieran. It was for anyone who didn't measure up. It was for her, too, in a way. She had just always been sitting at the right table, playing the right part. She looked at Kieran, standing tall and alone by a table meant to diminish him, and she knew with a certainty that shook her to her core that she was sitting on the wrong side of the room. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of polite conversation that felt like shards of glass in Naomi's ears. She barely touched her food, the knot in her stomach having grown into a stone. She watched Kieran from across the cavernous room. He ate little, but he engaged with the children at his table, his deep voice a low murmur, his smile for them genuine and warm. He was a king holding court in a forgotten province, his grace making their petty cruelty look even smaller, more pathetic. Naomi confronted her mother in the library, her voice a low, furious whisper. "How could you?" Eleanor was unrepentant, waving a dismissive hand. "Oh, Naomi, don't be so dramatic. He's a mechanic." He was probably relieved not to have to make small talk with the senator. "I was doing him a favor." The words hung in the air, a perfect crystallization of her mother's worldview. A world of hierarchies and surfaces, where a person's worth was determined by their title and their bank account. A world Naomi had been groomed to conquer, and a world she now desperately wanted to burn to the ground. She left that night with Kieran and a sleeping Amara, the apology she offered in the car feeling like a weak, pathetic bandage on a gaping wound. He just squeezed her hand and said, "It's okay, Naomi. I see you." But she knew it wasn't okay. Nothing was okay. The following Tuesday, the world tilted on its axis. Naomi was in a board meeting presenting quarterly projections when her phone, set to silent, began vibrating incessantly on the table. Texts, emails, news alerts. A colleague slid a tablet across the polished mahogany table, his eyes wide. On the screen was the Forbes website. It wasn't their annual 40 under 40 list. It was a special feature, the Unseen Titans, innovators cashing in. And there, halfway down the page, was a picture of Kieran. It was an old college photo, grainy and youthful, next to a headline that made her vision swim. Kieran Hayes, co-developer of the now ubiquitous phase lock data compression algorithm, sees dormant patent acquired by Omnicorp in a 9-figure deal. Personal take-home for the reclusive inventor, an estimated $80 million. The article detailed the story. A software patent he and his college roommate had developed in their dorm room, something they thought had potential, but that never took off. They'd sold a majority stake to a small tech firm years ago for pocket money and had all but forgotten about it. That small firm had just been acquired by a global conglomerate, and their long-dormant patent was the crown jewel of the deal. Kieran, who had retained a small percentage of ownership, was suddenly, shockingly, incomprehensibly wealthy. The boardroom was silent. All eyes were on her. They all knew the man from the kids' table. They had all heard the whispers after Thanksgiving. Her phone rang. The caller ID read Mother. Naomi's hand was shaking as she answered. Naomi, darling. Eleanor's voice was a waterfall of synthetic warmth. I just saw the most incredible news. My goodness. Who knew your Kieran was so accomplished? A true genius hiding in plain sight. We simply must have him and that sweet, sweet girl over for Christmas dinner. At the main table, of course. We'll have a proper celebration. The hypocrisy was so blatant, so utterly shameless, it was almost breathtaking. And in that moment, something inside Naomi snapped. The years of striving, of seeking approval, of contorting herself into a shape her parents would find acceptable. It all fell away. All that was left was a cold, hard, beautiful clarity. She stood up, the entire boardroom watching her. She walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over the city she had fought so hard to conquer. It looked small from up here. No, Mother, she said, her voice quiet, but carrying the weight of a final judgment. It was the voice she used to kill a bad deal, precise and unforgiving. You won't be having him over. You had your chance to see him, to know him. What are you talking about, dear? You were just what? Naomi cut in, her voice like ice. Being a good hostess? You had every idea who he was. You just didn't care. You saw a mechanic with grease under his fingernails. I saw a good man. You saw a single father from the wrong side of town. I saw a devoted father who would walk through fire for his daughter. You saw a man you could insult, a man you could put at a kid's table to make a point about class. She took a deep, steadying breath. I saw the only man who has ever made me feel safe. The only person who has ever seen me. The real me, not the CEO. So no, we will not be coming for Christmas. Or ever again. She ended the call without waiting for a reply. A profound silence filled the room. She turned back to the board of directors, her face serene. Gentlemen, she said, her voice clear and strong, I believe my presentation is complete. I have somewhere more important to be. She picked up her purse, leaving the tablet, the projections, and the entire life they represented behind on the table, and walked out of the room. It was the death of her old life and the magnificent, terrifying, glorious first day of her real one. She drove to his apartment, her heart pounding a frantic, hopeful rhythm against her ribs. She found him in the middle of a gentle chaos. His phone was ringing off the hook, and he was staring at his laptop with a look of dazed disbelief. But when he looked up and saw her standing in his doorway, the noise of the world seemed to fade away for them both. He stood up, and she crossed the room in 3 quick strides, stopping just before him. She didn't mention the money. She didn't mention Forbes. She looked into his steady, kind eyes. I am so sorry, Kieran, she whispered, the words thick with emotion. For Thanksgiving, for my family, for ever making you feel like you were anything less than the best man I have ever known. He shook his head, a small, sad smile on his face. It's okay, Naomi. No, she said, reaching out to cup his face in her hands, her touch firm, resolute. It's not. It was cruel, and it was wrong, and it will never, ever happen again, because their world is not my world anymore. You are. You and Amara. It was a vow, a declaration of allegiance. It had nothing to do with the $80 million and everything to do with the drawing taped to his refrigerator. He searched her face, and he saw the truth of her words shining in her eyes. The relief that washed over him was immense. The money was terrifying, a tidal wave that threatened to change everything. But she was his anchor. She was real. They stood there for a long moment, in the quiet center of the storm, just breathing each other in. The silence was broken by the soft patter of feet. Amara came into the room, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. She was holding the drawing she had made for Naomi, the paper slightly crumpled from being cherished. She walked straight to Naomi and held it up. "You came back," she said, a happy, sleepy smile on her face. Then she looked from Naomi to her father and back again, her gaze full of a child's profound wisdom. "Does that mean you're staying forever?" Naomi's eyes filled with tears, but this time she didn't fight them. She knelt down, so she was at eye level with the little girl who had seen her from the very beginning. She looked from Amara's beautiful, hopeful face to Kieran's, and she saw her future, her family, her home. "Yes," she whispered, her voice breaking with the sheer, overwhelming joy of it. "Yes, I am." 6 months later, the late afternoon sun spilled through the windows of a house that was neither a cramped apartment nor a cold estate. It was a home, with wide wooden floors, comfortable furniture, and a sprawling, wild garden out back. The money hadn't changed Kieran. It had simply given him freedom. Freedom to quit the late-night calls, to be home for Amara every single night. He had used a significant portion of it to start a foundation in Maya's name, an organization dedicated to supporting single parents. Naomi, having walked away from her corporate kingdom without a backward glance, now ran it with him. She had never worked harder, and she had never been happier. From the porch, Kieran watched her in the garden. Her hair, a beautiful collection of natural coils, was free, catching the golden light. She wore old jeans and a sweatshirt, her hands covered in dirt as she and Amara carefully planted a row of sunflowers. Amara's beaded braids bounced with excitement, the colors a bright flash against the green of the garden. Laughter carried on the warm breeze, a sound more valuable than any stock portfolio. He walked down the steps and into the garden, the soft earth yielding under his boots. He stopped beside Naomi, who looked up at him, her deep brown skin luminous, her smile radiant. He didn't have a ring. He hadn't prepared a speech. Grand gestures were her old world. This new world was built on quiet, unshakable truths. He took her dirt-smudged hand in his calloused fingers intertwining with hers. A perfect fit. "You know," he said, his voice soft, meant only for her, "Amara has been asking a lot of questions lately. Her main one is about when she can officially start calling you Mom." Naomi's breath hitched. She looked over at Amara, who was now carefully watering the newly planted seeds. She looked back at Kieran, at this quiet, noble man who had fixed her car and, in doing so, had fixed her life. Tears welled in her eyes, tears of pure, unadulterated joy. "I'd like that," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I would really, really like that." He smiled, a slow, beautiful smile that reached his eyes and erased any lingering trace of weariness. He was home. They were all home. And the narrator might say that in a world that measures worth in dollars and titles, the greatest fortune is to be truly seen. Family is not a matter of blood, but of choice. A quiet daily decision to show up, to care, to love without condition. The most valuable thing you can ever possess is a place at a table where you are known, cherished, and celebrated not for what you have, but for the simple, miraculous truth of who you are. A place where you belong.